Alright, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said of American Hero? Stick around and find out. Believe it or not, I'm walking on there. I never thought I could feel so free. I really wish this was a reboot of Greatest American Hero. That would be awesome. That needs to happen. Some kind of TV show or movie reboot of The Greatest American Hero would be awesome. That's not what this was. This is just called American Hero, which is about Melvin, as IMDb says, a reluctant superhero who lives only for crime, women, and drugs, until he realizes that the only way he will ever get to see his estranged son is to go straight and fulfill his potential as a crime fighter. I'm not sure I would describe it that way. He's never really a superhero at all in this movie, and to call this a superhero movie, I think would leave someone disappointed if they went in with that expectation. Let's talk about the story and the script and the pacing and stuff like that. This is a drama. It's it's a superpower story, not a superhero story. Similar in some ways to Chronicle. Also in the way that was filmed in kind of a documentary style. This is also filmed in a documentary style. There's a film crew that is interested in making a documentary about this guy Melvin, who has the ability to move objects telekinetically with his mind. And if you watch the trailer, you'll see like a ton of that stuff going on. The trailer to me left an impression of, okay, this is going to be a drama, but it's going to have lots of action in it too. It's going to be kind of a comedy. It's much more of a drama than it is an action comedy. So if you watch the trailer, don't go in with expectations of independent, sci-fi action comedy or something. This is much more of a quiet slice of life drama with a few bursts of action here and there. There are also a few jarring jumps in the editing style from scene to scene that made it confusing to me as to what they were trying to say about the characters. So it's a movie that not only is it a little bit slow and a little bit quiet, but you have to stay engaged and try to figure out, okay, what are they trying to tell me about this character? It's very character driven, and so you're just kind of watching Melvin as his life is just tanking at the beginning, and then as he really wants to get connected with his son again because his ex-wife has basically denied him any rights to see and visit his son. So he's trying to clean up his life so that he can spend some time with his son, who's probably about, I want to say, like 6 or 7 years old, maybe. And so as a dad, I certainly connected to that type of story. So I mean, if you're a sucker for father-son stories, I think there's something in this for you. But anyway, it's, like I said, stylistically, as far as like the feel and the pace of the movie, it's one that you kind of have to be ready to not just be blown away and be spoon-fed all the plot and character elements. You just kind of have to watch and kind of figure out what you think about about this character, what's going on, where the story is heading. Stephen Dorff plays the superpowered Melvin, and I really thought this was great casting. Last time I saw him in a movie was probably when he was the villain in the original Blade movie, and he does a really good job here. Melvin has this hard edge. We learn later on that he's actually an Iraq War veteran, and we don't really know like exactly why his life kind of spiraled downward. It seems to be just like the result of long-term poor choices in his life and in his values and priorities. But he's got this hard edge, but he's also clearly a person who is talented and intelligent because he's very thoughtful and intellectual at times. But it's also clear that he just hasn't disciplined himself to develop any of that. So he's an interesting character to kind of watch and just kind of see what he's going to say, and depending on whether he's using drugs at the time or not, he's a different kind of person and almost has a little bit of a different personality in some of his scenes, and he also has vulnerability and emotion beneath the street tough attitude that he carries around a lot of the time. Eddie Griffin, who was a familiar face, but I couldn't tell you what in the world I've seen him in before. I haven't seen him in anything in a while, though, but he's Melvin's best friend, Lucille, who's bound to a wheelchair. They served together in the war, and that's where he got his injury. He's a great kind of confidant and coach as Melvin endeavors to go straight and clean up his life. He's kind of the angel on his shoulder saying, you got to clean yourself up, man. You can do better things. You can do wonderful things with your life instead of what you're doing right now. But at the same time, he himself does not always discourage when Melvin, kind of tanks a bit and stuff. He's just not as extreme in his substance abuse as Melvin is. And so that's why he can kind of be that angel on his shoulder. The rest of the cast is solid and fits the grounded kind of documentary style well, I thought. Some smaller parts might have even been filled by people that the crew just met on the street. I mean, some of the banter and stuff with like these bit supporting characters, I'm just like, I'll bet these are just people they just found that day on the street while they were filming. This this is really interesting, you know. So it results in a very kind of emotionally grounded feel to most of the movie. Not always maybe as like hardcore psychologically realistic, because people, while they kind of freak out, you know, because of his powers and stuff, there's also a large amount of just kind of acceptance of this is just this thing that he's able to do, you know. And so it's interesting. It's interesting, but it's still, like I said, on the whole feels very grounded, and that really helped to sell the special effects to me, which sometimes were lacking. Most of the effects were pretty good. The effects are all about Melvin moving things with his mind, and so much of the time they're going to be they're making CG objects to move around on screen, instead of like attaching things to wires and then removing the wires later on. And that, when that's done well, you can do some fantastic things. I would again compare it to the movie Chronicle, which had a number of effects in there that were involved moving CG objects, which were standing in as real objects. And in some instances, I was like, wow, that really, if I wasn't like scrutinizing it, I would totally be fooled. You know, it's like, in fact, the first viewing of Chronicle, there were several effects that I was like, I'm not sure, you know. And then it wasn't until repeat viewings that I was like, oh yeah, that's CG going on there. But this movie is not as consistently solid in the special effects in that apartment. Most of the time, it's pretty solid, but there's definitely some times where it's like, yeah, this looks kind of like cheap CG. It's a little bit of a bummer, you know. It does strike me as kind of like a smaller independent film, so that's not super surprising. But I do think it was pretty close in visual effects quality to Chronicle. But I mean, that was, I don't know how many years ago now. At least I want to say 5 or so. So I wish that the effects in this movie were better, were a step forward. But thankfully, the performances and the tone of the movie helped me to kind of accept and forgive the effects when they were weak. All right, so is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual relevance that might trigger worthwhile thought or conversation during or after watching this movie? Well, maybe, I don't know. I don't think that they were, if they were shooting to kind of like say something with this movie, I think it was a little bit too subtle for me to pick up on, you know, like, okay, this is definitely kind of a moral or some kind of like philosophical agenda, some idea they want to put out there for you to digest. I really do think it was much more of just kind of a character story. I don't think they were trying to say a whole lot. But if I were to kind of dig and contemplate a little bit after watching this movie, a few things come to mind. One would be power fantasy. I love power fantasies. It's one of the reasons that I play video games. I think as long as we're not fantasizing about dominating others, you know, and just kind of being the boss of everybody, if that's not attached to our power fantasy, there's nothing wrong with power fantasies. They're actually, I think, a foretaste of the bodies that we've been promised as believers that are going to be raised in power. We're not going to have the weakness and the frustration of this broken, often dysfunctional, deteriorating body in the future. So I don't think that in and of itself there's anything wrong at all with a power fantasy. But I mean, you know, we can, as we kind of think about like what it would be like to have superpowers, we can think, man, my life would just be amazing, you know. But would it really? You know, we can dream about accomplishing epic things, whether we're talking about doing that with superpowers or just in our lives. Maybe we want to write the next great fantasy novel, you know, or do something else, you know, that's just really significant. I put that in quotes, you know. But in the end, it's really our relationships that matter. It's not these things that we accomplish or these things that we're known for and have a reputation for and we have recognition and, you know, public significance for. It's relationships that matter, and having talents and abilities, even that stand head and shoulders above everybody else, doesn't mean that our relationships will be healthy and that our life will be fulfilled. Another thing that popped up to me was the idea that practice makes permanent. Melvin is really trying to turn his life around, but he's had what looks like just a lifetime of self-absorbed habits that are really hard for him to break. He does relapse at least once. And using alcohol, drugs, sex, or even just entertainment to escape our problems doesn't solve our problems. It's just a temporary numbing band-aid that leaves us empty when the feeling wears off, and it only makes us even more self-absorbed. So I think just kind of having an awareness of, man, you know, trying to numb the pain with entertainment or whatever the thing is that we might choose is not going to fix the problem. It's just going to make it more and more difficult to change and have our life changed for the better in the future. The third thing that popped out to me is that religion is really not enough. And even as a Christian, I would say, yeah, religion is not enough, because religion is really just kind of a pattern of doing things that's associated with worship. But this pattern, this lifestyle pattern, it's not enough. Melvin seems to be a church attender in this movie, but his involvement in the church seems to be just kind of one more high that he's trying to maintain, joining in with the exuberant worship singing, but not allowing God to really rule his life and define for him what he ought to prioritize, what he ought to care about, what things are really valuable in life. Faith was not portrayed negatively in this movie, but it's also not especially helpful to any of the characters in the story. It's a theme that it's a bit too underdeveloped to say anything clearly to me, and I'm not even sure they were trying to say anything. But it was, if they weren't trying to say anything at all about faith, it was kind of weird to kind of inject it in there a little bit. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But anyway, I have no idea what your tastes in movies are, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Prater, hey, this one's worth renting. Although, I should say that when Melvin relapses, turn away when the party music starts until the party music stops. There's some unnecessary nudity that's tossed in briefly that really isn't needed, just to convey to us that Melvin has fallen back into depravity. I would say go in expecting a quiet, slow-paced drama, not an action comedy as the trailer might suggest, and with the right expectations, I think this is a solid movie despite some flaws. Now, it's not rated, but I would say it's equivalent to an R rating for language throughout, violence, and brief nudity. Alright, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. You can also support this channel by visiting spiritblade.com and seeing what we have for you there. Very soon I'm going to be releasing, at long last, the third part of the Spirit Blade audio drama trilogy entitled Spirit Blade: A World of Shadows, so stay tuned for more news about that. That release is probably going to happen sometime in July, if I were to guess. So you can support this channel, again, by going to spiritblade.com and seeing what we have for you there. And then, if you would, like, share, and subscribe if you like this video and want more videos like it and want to share it with people. And then, oh crap, where's my thing? Here we go. Then I hope, boom, you go to christiangeekcentral.com for a ton more content and community, and join us there as we continue to geek out. I was trying to hide the fact that I couldn't find it. I had this here in my eyes. Where's my button? Geek out and seek the truth.